The Dharma, incomparably profound and exquisite, is rarely met with even in hundreds of thousands of millions of kalpas. We now can see it, hear it, accept and hold it. May we realize the true mind is the Tathagata. Not much is said in Zen about the self-image other than that it exists. And so I'd like to talk a little bit more about this on this 6th day of Sesshin in January 2022, the first of 2 in a row Sesshin here at Mountain Gate in northern New Mexico. We have our own assumed perceptions about the world around us, about whether we're liked or not liked, whether people are good to us or not, whether we're acceptable or not, whether we're, you name it. And the normal way of relating to this, at least in Western cultures, is to assume that there's an other that is the real problem. If they were just not doing whatever they're doing or saying whatever they're saying or whatever to us, then we'd be fine. But in actuality, because science has confirmed what Buddhism has long taught, that there is no separation among us, that we share all manner of energy. We are ourselves concentrations of energy that includes the energy of many hitchhikers. In fact, in bodies, it is said that much more than half of our body is simply water, and that more cells in this so-called body of ours, it consists of bacteria, viruses, protozoa, all kinds of other critters, some of which help keep us healthy and in some cases happy. There's actually research going into whether the biome, the human biome, that is the critters in our guts, are actually, if there's a particular set of them that portends happiness or ease in life. It's still in early research, so we don't have any real results, but there's definitely a thought that, enough of a thought that research is actually funded in that direction. Of course, it may be funded by the pharmaceutical companies who are longing to make what would be a very profitable pill or capsule containing this particular formulation of bacillus or whatever they are. So actually, there's a really big question, and it was investigated somewhat in previous Teishos. Who are we? What are we? Are we this assumption, this set of assumptions about ourselves, that we're hated or loved, that we are prejudiced against or not, and all the different things that people can think and assume? Or is there something more to it? We have a sixth sense that there is something more to it, that there is something beyond the veil, as one person commented, that there's something just barely out of reach that we need to return to connecting with, that is vital. And it's true. And as part of our practice, in fact, a major part of our practice, and a very vital part of our practice, and this goes along with what is called the long maturation by Tode Enji, Hakuin's Dharma successor, main Dharma successor. And that is, as we continue to work on focusing on our inner experience, searching within. I liken it to an archaeological dig within. We're searching for something increasingly subtle, and that is the reality of who we are. Who we think we are is not the reality. We create our own assumption of reality because based on our assumptions about ourselves and our assumptions about people around us and how they interact with us, we draw those kinds of experiences to us that reinforce our self-image. As we go deeper and deeper and deeper in our practice, and that requires going beyond thought, because thought creates stories and stories are not reality. You can describe something and it will not be what really is or what really was. And on top of that, there is research these days that says that our memory isn't even a stable, fixed thing. It used to be felt that we had an experience and we sort of took a mental photograph of it and stuck it in an inner file cabinet somewhere in our brain. And when we wanted to think about that or re-experience it, we just pull it out. It's not as simple as that. Our memories are apparently constantly updated, revised, based on our experience. And I can tell you one of those experiences in my own life. In high school, I was sure that I was fat. In every picture that I saw of myself in the yearbook, for example, I looked fat. Everybody else looked slim. And of course, in the 50s, they were certainly more slim than most people are now. And many, many years passed, always with this assumption that I was fat. And then one day, after many years of Zazen, my former high school boyfriend sent me the copies of the last 2 yearbooks. I had been the art editor of both of them. And I looked at the pictures again. I wasn't fat. And yet I spent all those years condemning myself as being fat. It's something worth considering. So as we go deeper in our practice, as we go beyond the words, the ideas, the assumptions, through extending the out-breath, which forces a focus, if we're doing it correctly, and that focus, as you've heard so many times, requires letting go of other considerations. Your focus is directed to an inner experience of extending the out-breath with a sense of, you could call it perplexity, a sense of yearning, a sense of needing to reconnect. That is an incredibly powerful practice. But what it does is it begins to reveal where we're caught. It begins to reveal the painful self-image, little by little by little by little. And so many people quit practice right at that point because it feels like we're doing worse practice. Shunryu Suzuki-roshi, who founded the San Francisco Zen Center, called it mind weeds. And he said that you can use them as fertilizer for your practice. Manure is what he called it. And that was back in the days when manure was used on farms as fertilizer. The only place that's used that way these days is in the Amish countries, the Amish farms. But this is a real advantage. As we see these places where we're caught, we begin to to see, oh my gosh, I thought it was this way, and really, it wasn't. And there may be a stab in the heart or some other discomforting feeling in our body. When that happens, go into that felt sense, the sensation of the body that is termed the felt sense, and embrace it, be curious about it. The more we do this, the braver we get, the more courage comes up for us as we begin to realize that each time we do this, there's a bit more freedom that comes forth. And here I want to say something about freedom. The only freedom there is, what is called true liberation. It's not being in jail. You can be in the midst of jail for a life sentence and still be free. The more we let go, the more we are free of being caught in assumptions around and reactions around our self-image. The self-image begins to be seen through, and it becomes easier and easier to meet difficult situations without being burnt by them, without feeling negatively impacted by them. And here I'd like to share two known situations, historically known situations. The first is a very old one from 16th century or the 1600s in Japan, 17th century Japan. The grandfather in Zen of Hakuin, whose name was Shido Munan, which is the first set of characters for a chant written by the third patriarch of Zen, Zen. And it reads, "The great way is not difficult." It continues in the chant, "The great way is not difficult for those who do not pick and choose." And that doesn't mean we stand there numb and shut down. It means that we don't get caught in choices. We don't get caught in ideas about ourselves and other people. It's a very, very deep experience, and one that is only earned by many, many years of committed practice. So Shido Bunan, and you've heard this story many times, was a middle-aged monk in a small temple in a village in Japan. And one day, a young girl in the village got pregnant. She was not married, and her parents tried to force her to tell who the father was. And she refused and refused and refused. And finally she said, "Oh, it's that monk, Shido Munan." And so when the baby was born, the grandparents took the baby to the temple, presented it to Shido Munan with significant accusation and condemnation, and said something like, "You embarrassed our family, you embarrassed our village, now deal with it." And Shido Munan, full of empathy for these parents in pain, for the girl in pain, simply responded very humbly, "Oh, it seems like that." And he received the baby and raised the baby for a year, at which point the mother confessed who the father really was. And so now the grandparents come back mortally embarrassed and apologize deeply to Shido Munan, who again is filled with compassion for the family and simply says, "Oh, it seems like that, doesn't it?" No anger, no bitterness, no feelings of being wrongly accused, even though he was. there was an immense and difficult to express, impossible to express really, freedom that he had reached through his lifetime of practice. He was already there before the first part of the incident happened. And the freedom was real. And you also can experience that very same freedom. So it doesn't matter what comes into your life, what negativity, what pain and suffering, you will be unbelievably, incalculably free of being caught in it and able to respond in the most appropriate ways. This is guaranteed if you go deeply enough in your practice. There's a couple of other stories, and these come out of Sogenji. Mitra-roshi has told them more than once. Well, no, he hasn't told the second one. The second one I learned from someone who was present at the incident. But the first one, he didn't say it was him, but I suspect it was him. His teacher, Mitra-roshi, had a car accident when he was driving. This is why Mitra-roshi does not drive. And because Mitra-roshi was such a high-profile human being, very famous actually, he was targeted by the mafia. I don't know whether he had the accident with someone in the mafia or what, but somehow the mafia got involved. The Japanese mafia, the yakuza they call it there, and he was being extorted. And so he handed a sum of money to a monk and was told to take it to the mafia person as one of the payments. And the monk said to Mitra-roshi, "I'll take care of it." After that, there were he gave the money back to Mitra-roshi, by the way, and said, I'll take care of it. And there was no further extortion. We don't know what the monk said. We don't know what the monk did, but that was the end of it. And I don't know who the monk was for sure, but I strongly suspect it was Harada, because unless he was standing there and experiencing the conversation, how else would he have known? The other experience is one that was told to me by someone who was standing there at the time and part of the small group that it happened to. This was while Mitra-roshi was still training as a monk at Shofukuji in Kobe, Japan. And he was leading a small detail, several of whom were foreigners actually, living and training at Shofukuji, because Yamada Mitra-roshi, unlike the prejudice at the time, was willing to accept foreigners into his temple and teach them just as he was teaching the Japanese. So they're standing there doing whatever work they're doing, and probably not standing there, but they're outside the main temple gates, but still on temple property. And the person that told me this said he was holding a shovel at the time that this incident happened, and kept holding it in case he needed to whack this person if he took a swing at Harada. It seems there was a group of homeless people living on the temple grounds, and they were convinced that the temple was cheating them out of water. Now, here's a major example of misunderstanding, of an assumption about a situation, a personal situation that was not accurate. And we all have our share of these things, and maybe not quite so much, so brash as what was expressed in that incident, but we all have our gross and subtle attachments to how we're being treated, we think, to all kinds of things. At any rate, the leader, or presumed leader of this group of homeless people, came up with his group, and as the person that told me this said, he appeared to be no stranger to violence. He was being extremely aggressive, standing right smack in front of Harada, screaming at him, red in the face, ready, it seemed, to punch him, which is why the person who told me this story hung on to a shovel in case he needed to use it as a weapon of defense. But what happened was that Harada became increasingly peaceful and quiet inside. He looked gently into the face of the man who was being so belligerent. He clearly honored this human being, even though he probably did not honor his behavior, but he understood that the man was distressed, and he listened to his distress without trying to back away, without trying to rebut, simply listened. Increasingly deeply quiet. And gradually the man responded and became more and more quiet himself. And the matter was solved amicably, and the group went away. How many of us would have stood there in the face of this violent, screaming man and not had our blood racing, not been ready to punch him? How many of us could have stood there and been so deeply inwardly quiet and honoring of that human being, despite the threat of violence? No, it was genuine, and so it worked. If it's not genuine, it won't work. But Mitra-roshi had spent almost 20 years in concentrated practice and was quite let go. Like Shiro-Wanan, he felt no need, nothing to defend, and was willing to hear the man, to honor the man. It made a great deal of difference. And as I said, this is an expression of our innate being, that when it's let go, and let go comes as a result of giving ourselves to the practice, regardless of what comes up in the practice. As I've said many times over, for people who've been traumatized, it's likely to come up. The terror, the anxiety, the whole set of fear is likely to come up in Zen practice. And at that point in time, it's important to work with an experienced trauma therapist who also understands Zen practice. And this part is important because it's possible to find a therapist who thinks they are a trauma therapist and does not have the background, for one, and also may have a significant prejudice against something like Zen practice and assume it's a cult situation, which in most cases it's not. Here and there is something like that, but at Mountain Gate, it's not a cult. You can come and check it out for yourself. Please wear a mask, and only come if you've been vaccinated fully, because otherwise you put the rest of us in danger, no matter what you believe. in terms of coronavirus myths or scientific facts. I know personally that this mind state can be experienced and lived. Flora Courtois also experienced that and lived it. Many, many people have. And you won't find them tooting their own horns because what's the point? And now I'd like to say something about practice beyond that, because there is a serious danger of falling into an assumed liberated mind state that is actually not. Hakuin called this the cave of dead sitting. For many people, we can get into a place of seeming peace, quiet in our zazen. And if it doesn't translate into our daily life, it's not real. It's a makyo. Let me share some of the words of Urgyen, Tulku Urgyen Rinpoche about this. If we're stuck in that kind of conviction, we've gone astray, and we can assume, we can be absolutely sure that things are this way, that we have realized such and such. It's all too common. We can be stuck in the conviction that this deeply peaceful feeling that we're getting in Zazen is absolutely authentic, when perhaps it's not. There is, when people have gone deeply in Zazen, there is a sense of peace, but it's not what we would call a peaceful feeling. It's a state of mind where nothing is caught, which is very different from blankness or an artificial peacefulness. This situation is very difficult to cure. It's a severe sidetrack. The very moment of recognizing mind nature and seeing no thing is itself non-distraction. But to think I'm undistracted is a fabrication, just like any other thought. It is easy for people to decide that mind is emptiness, but there's a difference between experiencing real emptiness and experiencing the idea of emptiness, which is simply another thought, even if it does feel real. The essence of mind is primordially emptiness. There's no question about that. It is not composed of any material substance whatsoever. But when we try to articulate that, thinking it's empty, I see it, then it becomes not empty. We understand that the master said, recognize your mind essence. See that there is no thing to see. That is real emptiness. Hearing this, it's easy to form the thought, this is emptiness, I see it. This is not real emptiness, but a fabrication, a fake. This counterfeit emptiness, a mere idea, does not cut through the root of the three poisons: greed, anger, and delusion. In the moment of seeing that mind essence is no thing whatsoever, we should not become entangled with any thought. Never speculate, now it's empty, or this is not empty, or this is it, or this is not it. And also, don't get caught in a blankness. We can sort of feel like this peaceful mind state is an emptiness, but that peaceful mind state is a sidetrack. This absence of all conceptual formulations is the special quality of the true Buddhist view. And then I'd like to share another bit of writing from also Tulku, my goodness, my tongue tangles around this, Tulku Urgyen Rinpoche. A Lama from the eastern Tibet province of Golok came to see the great Jamgon Kongtrul Lodro Daya. The Lama told Jamgon Rinpoche that he had stayed in a retreat hut meditating for 9 or 10 years. My practice is quite good now. At times I have some degree of clairvoyance. Whenever I place my attention on something, it remains unshakable. I feel so quiet and serene. Now, to be talking like this is already a giveaway that the guy's not very deep. I experience a state totally without thoughts and concepts. During long stretches of time, I experience nothing but bliss, clarity, and no thought. I would say that my meditation has been rather successful. Oh, what a pity, Jamgon Kongtrul said. The meditator left slightly downcast, only to return the next morning. Honestly, Rinpoche, my practice of samadhi is good. I've managed to equalize all mental states of pleasure and pain. The 3 poisons of anger, desire, and dullness have no real hold over me anymore. After meditating for 9 years, I would think this level is quite good. Oh, what a pity, retorted Jamgon Kongtrul. The meditator thought, he's reputed to be an eminent master beyond jealousy, but it sounds to me as if he's slightly jealous of me. I wonder. And again, that's another giveaway that the guy, the meditator, is not anywhere near as deep as he thinks he is. He then said, I came here to ask you about the nature of mind because of your great reputation. My meditation during time, this is time day, is fine. I'm not asking about that at all. I'm quite satisfied. What I want to ask about is how to practice during the night. That is when I experience some difficulty. Jamgon Kongtrul's reply was again just, oh, what a pity. The Lama thought, he really is envious of me. He probably doesn't have a fraction of the clairvoyant powers I do. When the meditator explained his clairvoyance, for me, it is no problem at all to see 3 or 4 days into the future. Jamgon Kongtrul again said, oh, what a pity. The meditator left him for his quarters. He must have begun to doubt himself because after some time he returned and said, I'm going back to my retreat. What should I do now? Jamgon Rinpoche told him, don't meditate anymore. From today on, give up meditating. If you want to follow my advice, then go home and stay in retreat for 3 years, but without meditating, even the slightest. Do not cultivate the state of stillness, even in the slightest. Meditator thought to himself, what is he saying? I wonder why. What does it mean? On the other hand, he's supposedly a great master. I will try it out and see what happens. So he said, all right, Rinpoche, and he left. When back in retreat, he had quite a hard time trying not to meditate. Every time he simply let be without the attempt to meditate, he always found himself meditating again. Later, he said, the first year was so difficult. The second year was somewhat better. At this point, he found that in the act of meditation, he had simply been keeping his mind busy and can be busy with a feeling of peace. Now he understood what Jamgon Kongtrul meant by saying, do not meditate. The third year, he reached some true non-meditation, leaving deliberate cultivation totally behind. He discovered a state utterly free from doing and meditating by simply leaving awareness exactly as it naturally is. At that point, nothing spectacular took place in his practice. No special clairvoyance either. Moreover, his meditating experience of bliss, clarity, and non-thought had vanished. After that, he thought, now my meditation the practice is totally lost. I'd better go back and get more advice. Returning before Jamgon Kongtrul and relating his experience, Rinpoche replied, right on, right on. Those 3 years made your meditation successful, right on. Jamgon Kongtrul continued, you don't need to meditate by deliberately keeping something in mind, but also don't be distracted. Meditator said, it may be due to my former training in stillness, but actually the stretches of his distraction are quite short. There isn't much distraction anymore. I feel I've discovered what you meant. I experience a state which is not created through meditation, yet which lasts for a while by itself. Right on, Jamgon Kongtrul said. Now spend the rest of your life training in that. And that was the story of the meditator from Golok, who was later known to have reached a quite high level of realization. And these 2 sets of quotes are from a book called Rainbow Teachings. And they are a collection of the teachings of Tulku Urgyen Rinpoche, who was quite deeply realized. So if you find yourself in a state of mind that seems very peaceful and nice, and you just really want to hang out there, don't. The practice is about allowing ourselves to sink within into what Dr. Dan Siegel called the sea of possibility. The sea of possibility. You cannot possibly imagine a free mind state. It's beyond any possibility. Don't try. And that's part of that. Don't try to get back to some seemingly really nice mind state that you may have experienced in the practice. The practice is about allowing ourselves to fully experience whatever we're going through, whether it's positive or negative, whether it's painful or joyful, and not to get caught in any of it, which is difficult because we're so accustomed to chasing pleasant feelings, pleasant experiences, trying to avoid negative ones. And I can tell you this also from my personal experience. The more we practice deeply in this manner, allowing letting go to happen, the less caught we are, and the less we are putting out a vibe, so to speak, that will impact other people in a way that they will be reactive to us. The more let go we are, the less there is for anybody else to grab onto. And our life changes with greater level of peace, greater level of understanding, the more we can let go. And that single practice of extending the out breath with the yearning to return, reconnect, however you want to put it, it is beyond words, really. And this is a sense that has been with us since early childhood, most likely. It's one of the things that Dan Siegel speaks of, that's what moved him to choosing his current vocation, that of child psychiatry, actually adult psychiatry as well, and his research into mindfulness. And and to what is perceived as reality. And his willingness to expand into various other disciplines to synthesize a sense. And that's where he came up with this sea of possibility. And that's a good one, really. Because when we have what I have long called an openness to possibility, and that does not mean possibility is a thing, nor is the sea of possibility a thing. It's a sea of potential. Out of not one thing arise the 10,000 things. That is the sea of potential, the sea of possibility in action. So on the 6th day of Sesshin, or almost into the 7th day, and of course, we have the great gift of having another 7-day Sesshin very soon after this one. This one ends tomorrow night, the 31st of January. The next one begins the 6th of February. A terrific chance to go so much more deep because of how far we've gone already in this Sesshin. So thank you for listening. We'll stop now and recite the 4 vows.